So some of you may be new to this message, and this message has been going on for many, many years now, so there's certain rules that are those of us that study this message that we know about without even questioning them. But if you're new, you're probably going to have some questions. But we're at the point that I won't spend a whole lot of time defending all of those little intricate things that may seem new to you. But what I would have you to do is go ahead, if there's something I say you really don't understand, write it down, and at some point towards the end, maybe I can answer those for you. But I'm really under personal pressure to try to get to some points here that seem pretty serious. Okay, so in your notes, this is just an overview of Daniel 11, which we're going to do, this graph. I'm going to pass by that. I want to put in place a pioneer understanding. And what I'm going to say here, if you're not familiar with it, we should be, that in Revelation chapter 5, God the Father is seated on the throne, and he has a book that's sealed with 7 seals in his hand. And then the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who is Christ, comes and takes that book that is sealed with 7 seals, and that book you can show is the Bible. And he begins to remove those seals one at a time. And we understand that symbols have more than one meaning. So the pioneer's understanding of the history that each of those seals represented, we accept that, we stand upon that, we're not changing that. But also, when you look at what seals up the Word of God according to the Spirit of Prophecy, Sister White says that the Bible in different periods of time becomes sealed to man's understanding through the reception of traditions and customs that are handed down from generation to generation. So when the Lion of the tribe of Judah in Revelation 5 and onward is unsealing the Bible, there's also a secondary level that he is at a point in history where he's removing those traditions and customs from the minds of men during that particular history and opening up the Word of God to them. Okay? But what I want you to see is that the pioneer understanding, the brethren that put this information into history about the work of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, because in Revelation 5 and onward, Christ is portrayed as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and what he's doing in there is he's removing these seals from the Bible. But the pioneers correctly understood that as the Lion of the tribe of Judah is taking these 7 seals off of the Bible during this history, they also understood that it was he, Christ, as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, that was also in Daniel 12 unsealing the book of Daniel. And if you remember Daniel 12, when the book of Daniel is unsealed, there's going to be an increase of knowledge, and many shall be purified and made white and tried in Daniel 12:10. What I want you to see is that both of these works, Sister White says the books of Daniel and Revelation go together. She says they complement one another. And the word complement is with an E, not with an I. A compliment with an I is if you're giving someone you look nice today. That's a compliment with an I. But Sister White says the books of Daniel and Revelation complement with an E, which means brings to perfection. Okay, so what I'm saying in terms of that is that when you see Christ unsealing the book of Daniel at the time of the end in 1798, he is simultaneously beginning to remove the 7 seals to the understanding of the Millerites during this same history. Okay, so this is a pioneer understanding. This isn't anything new, and that's where I'm going to start here in a moment, is show you that the pioneers understood that. But the reason I have this here is because the first thing that William Miller comes to understand, because he's the one that understands the increase of knowledge in the Millerite history, is he understands the judgment hour message, okay? For the hour of his judgment is come, okay? But you see, Miller didn't have it fully understood. Over here, if you're familiar with early writings, page 74, Sister White, speaking of this chart, says the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and it should not be altered. Okay, but in that passage in early writing 74, she says the Lord held his hand over a mistake in some of the figures. And you can follow on further in early writings. I think it's page 256, but you can follow on where she comments on that. She says on page 74, the Lord held his hand over some of the figures. And when you go further on in early writings, she tells you directly that the figures he held his hand over are these right here. Okay? So William Miller was given the judgment hour cry, but he thought the Lord was going to come in 1843, sometime in 1843. Okay? And when the last day of 1843 came, theoretically, then the Lord removed his hand. Okay? So what that produced was down here, the final revelation of truth in the Millerite history is delivered by Samuel Snow. Okay? But Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. So the midnight cry message that's brought by Samuel Snow at the Exeter camp meeting, it's the perfection of the judgment hour cry. Miller's message was the hour of his judgment is come, but he didn't understand the fullness of year. Okay, the fullness of year mistake is what prevented them from seeing 1844. So when the year 1843 ended, and the biblical year of 1843 ends on April 19th, 1844. That's December 31st of 1843. And the next day is January 1st of 1844. That's the first disappointment in the Millerite history. That's where the tarrying time begins in the Millerite history. But it's also where the Lord removes his hand. Because now they know 1843 is past tense, and they're already understanding this in advance of that event. But I'm just giving you the prophetic sequence. Samuel Snow's already dealing with it before 1843 runs out. But I want you to see that it's not until the year 1843 has passed that you can, in theory, say that the Lord has removed his hand from that chart. And then what Samuel Snow does is through various lines of prophecy, he doesn't just come to 1844. He understands the month, October, the day, 22nd, 1844. So what I want you to see, in this midnight cry message, it goes right to October 22nd, 1844, when the door closes. So the final revelation of light for the Millerite history is the midnight cry message, which means if in this history, and this is what I'm saying, in this history of the Millerites, there's 7 seals that get removed. The first seal was the judgment hour cry, but Jesus always illustrates the end from the beginning, so the last seal would also be the judgment hour cry, which it was. But Samuel Snow brings the judgment hour cry to perfection. The 7th seal is what brings it to perfection. Okay, because now you got the right year, you got the month, and the day. Okay? But we understand that the Millerite history perfectly illustrates our history. And in 1989, the Lord opened up the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. That's what's in this magazine. This magazine was published in 1996, and several years ago we quit counting how many languages this is in around the world. It's in bunches of languages around the world, and has been repeatedly translated since that time period. So what I'm saying is, what was unsealed for Adventism at the end of the world, the time of the end for us at the end of the world, were these last 6 verses of Daniel 11. And I'm saying that now in our history, what we're going to look at here at this point in time is the perfection of this message. Okay? And we're going to show you something in this magazine that was not recognized. And it was typified by the Lord holding his hand over this chart. There was a truth about the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 in this magazine that wasn't recognized, that is now recognized. And by that recognition, it turns on so many prophetic lights that you cannot keep up. I don't know anyone's keeping up with it right now, with everything that's happening. And everything that's happening is happening in agreement with what's going on in the political world right now. It's really, really scary stuff. Okay, so I may have lost you, But what I want you to see before we go to the notes is I'm saying that at the time of the end, there is a special message opened up for whatever generation that happens in. And every reform movement has a time of the end. Okay? The birth of Christ was the time of the end for that history. And that the birth of Christ opened up a special light for that history. And the special light for that history is that the Messiah was here. That special light was going to test the people when Christ walked among the earth. Okay? The birth of Moses was the time of the end for his history. And his special message was it's time to come out of Egypt. And the coming out of Egypt was going to test that generation. For the Millerites, the time of the end was 1798, and the special light that was going to test them is that the judgment was about to begin. And it would test that history. This being the beginning of Adventism, we're the end of Adventism. These last 6 verses tell you that judgment is to close. Millerites, judgment is opening. Us, judgment closes. Okay, but when the time of the end came for the Millerites, there's an increase of knowledge, an escalation of knowledge, and when that progressive revelation of knowledge is illustrated in the book of Revelation, it's illustrated by the Lion of the tribe of Judah removing 7 seals. The 7th seal, 7 is talking about perfection. The judgment hour cry is brought to perfection by the midnight cry message here at the end, and it leads to the closing of the door. So you got to have that in place. There's the perfection. I'm saying that right now the Lord is bringing this to perfection, and among other things, it's telling us that our probation is about to close. Okay, so let me put this in place so you can see that this is Pioneer Understanding. I'm on page 1 of your notes.
The extra notes?
Does everyone have notes?
She does. He does.
Okay. It was the Lion of the tribe of Judah that unsealed the book and gave to John the revelation of what should be in these last days. What book gets unsealed? The book of Daniel. In the next sentence, she says, Daniel stood in his lot to bear his testimony, which was sealed unto the time of the end, when the first angel's message should be proclaimed to our world. Sister right here is telling us that it's the Lion of the tribe of Judah that unsealed the book of Daniel, and Jesus is portrayed as the Lion of the tribe of Judah in chapter 6 of Revelation when he goes and he takes the book out of the Father's hand and he begins to remove those seals. Okay, so what I'm telling you is that the idea that both Daniel and Revelation are dealing with the same thing about Christ's responsibility to open up truth to his people. That's a typical understanding. Now the next 2 paragraphs we'll pass over just because of time and go to the 3rd paragraph. This is from Great Controversy 355 and 356. And if you read all 3 of these paragraphs, that 3rd paragraph is the classic one that we will use to show that 1798 was the time of the end. But the two paragraphs that I skipped over are the argument in the Great Controversy, and you can find in other places, that what Miller was understanding was the judgment hour message. The logic is that based upon Daniel chapter 7, Paul knew, based upon Daniel chapter 7, when he was speaking to the Thessalonians was wondering when the second coming of Christ was going to be. But Paul, because he knew Daniel chapter 7, knew that the papacy had to rule the world for 1,260 years before there would even be a possibility of the second coming of Christ. So Sister White's using this logic in these paragraphs that I'm pointing to in Great Controversy to say, not until 1798 could you have a message of the judgment. And in 1798, the book of Daniel is unsealed, and the first angel's message arrives in history. Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment is come. But Miller was off on the year. Okay? Doesn't get perfected until Samuel Snow comes with the midnight cry message. Okay, the next quote under the unsealing is from James White. And it's a long paragraph, but I cut a bunch of the paragraph out just to make my point, to give you an illustration that this is Pioneer Understanding. What Daniel was commanded to seal up and close, Daniel 12:4, is now, through the all-powerful mediation of the line of the tribe of Judah, revealed unto us. Revelation 5:5. Hence many run to and fro, and knowledge is increased. The opening, then, and the unfolding of the prophetic word is another convincing proof that we are arrived at the end of the age, the unsealing of prophecy and the revelation of the mystery of God being reserved unto the time of the end. Okay, so he's in agreeing that it's the line of the tribe of Judah that's doing both things simultaneously, unsealing the book of Daniel and removing the 7 seals. But he has another important thought there, that when you see prophecies becoming out in the open like they've been doing over the last 6 weeks, you know you're close to the end. All right. And then you have a quote there from Gerhard Damsteed in his book that they use at Andrews University about Millerite history, and he's talking about Samuel Snow and the Midnight Cry message. So that's what I wanted you to see by those quotes. Now, I'll tell you theoretically, well, if you don't know it, just so you do, in 1991, the understanding of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 began to be recognized, okay? But in 1989, what was being studied is the reform lines. 1989, the reform lines were the first thing that started to be studied, and that's the line upon line application that we do so often in this message. And then came Daniel 11, 40 to 45. So I'm saying that this truth here for our movement has been typified by this truth here for the Millerite movement. And therefore, when we get down to here, we're going to have to see the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 brought to perfection. We should expect to see that there was something misunderstood in this history that the Lord held his hand over. We're going to show you what that is. And you're going to see it illustrated line upon line, because that's the first thing that was opened up here, is that the methodology of the latter rain is accomplished through line upon line. So in the past, if you go to Daniel now, if you go to Daniel 10, in the past year or so, we begin to understand that Trump is identified by 2 figures in Daniel 11. He's identified by Xerxes and by Tiberius. Okay, so we've already spent a lot of time over the past year showing that. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on dealing with the 4 presidents. I am going to put the 4 presidents in history, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the point-by-point verse breakdown of why we're saying that Donald Trump is the 45th president of the United States and that the number 45 is a symbol. About a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, there was a sister in Southern California in between a couple of meetings, and I was up front still in front of the charts, and she comes up and she says, "You see that number 45 on the chart? Doesn't it, with this chart being sacred, doesn't that mean that the number 45 ought to be symbolic?" And she gave a reference about Joshua that was pretty profound, and we started thinking about number 45. And number 45 now, it's just unbelievable, brothers and sisters, the witnesses to you that you have concerning the number 45. I don't know that we'll get through all the material that I want to get through here this weekend, but I will tell you this so you can get the significance of this. All right, the significance of the number 45. There are not very many books in the Bible that have 45 or more chapters. Okay, there's Genesis, there's Psalms, there's Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. I think there's one other that I'm not thinking of right now, but you'll find that every one of those books, that the 45th chapter is dealing with the history we're going to deal with here. And you will find that of the Conflict of the Ages series, other than the Great Controversy that does not have enough chapters, Patriarchs and Prophets, Prophets and Kings, Desire of Ages, and Acts of the Apostles, the 45th chapter of each one of those books is dealing with the history that we're going to deal with, which is the history of the 45th President of the United States. Wow. And it's not a minor reference. It'll blow your mind when you start seeing it. Okay, so the 45th President is a subject of prophecy. And we've been dealing with that for probably a year now. I don't know how long. So we're going to pass over the details of that once we get started. But I want to start in Daniel chapter 10. And because I don't know where everyone's at in their understanding, in Daniel 10, verse 1, it says, "And in the 3rd year Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar, and the thing was true, but the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing, and he had understanding of the vision." Okay, so there's 2 visions in here that are being referenced, the Mare and the Hazon vision. And Daniel, when a prophet becomes part of the prophecy, he's representing God's people at the end of the world. So at the end of the world, Daniel here in verse 1 is representing God's people at the end of the world that have a complete understanding of both the Mare vision and the Hazon vision. The Mare vision is the vision that talks about, that is identifying the appearance of Christ. Okay? And the Hazon vision is the vision of prophetic history. One vision is the nuts and bolts of the rise and falls of the kingdoms that are illustrated in God's word. That's the Hazon vision. But the Mare vision is the vision that the prophets have when they're illustrating, as Isaiah does in Isaiah 6, and he sees the glory of the Lord and he's humbled in the dust. Okay? And Daniel's going to have that experience in this very chapter. But the first thing it tells us is that before he has that experience, he already has understanding of both the Mare and the Hazon. And the significance of that is major, all right, but I'm not going to get into it. So now if you know the story, Daniel's going to pray for he's going to fast for 21 days over the next few verses. And then when you get to verse 5, it says, "Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude." Okay, this is the Mare experience. This is the appearance of Christ. And Sister White says this is Christ. Daniel's been fasting for 21 days, and without any explanation because of time, we mark this 21 days after 9/11. It's a symbol after 9/11, and it takes you to midnight. Okay, and at midnight, those people in this history that are being prepared and tested, they're going to have this experience that Daniel is having right here. And you'll notice that when they have that experience, he's with a group of people, but the group of people, they flee, okay, because this is the separation of the wheat and tares. Mm-hmm. All right, so there's a lot to be said about that, and I'm just passing over. This is a matter of public record for a long time now. So continuing on, in verse 7, here's the separation of the wheat and tares. "And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men that were with me saw not the vision, but a great quaking fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. Therefore I was left alone, and saw this great vision, and there remained no strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in me into corruption, and I retained no strength. Yet heard I the voice of his words, and when I heard the voice of his words, then was I in a deep sleep on my face, and my face toward the ground, and behold," and if you're not familiar with doubling, you got a doubling in verse 9. Okay, and a doubling will put you at the midnight cry time period, when you see things doubled in the scriptures. But anyway, what I want you to see is verse 10. "And behold, a hand touched me, which set me upon my knees, and upon the palms of my hands." Okay, so Daniel's going to be touched 3 times. This is the first touch. And and if you drop down to verse 16, it says, "And behold, one like the similitude of the sons of men touched my lips." He just got touched a second time. "Then I opened my mouth and spake and said unto him that stood before me, O my Lord, by the visions my sorrows are turned upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? For as for me, straightway there remained no strength in me, neither is there breath left in me. And then there came and touched me for the third time, one like the appearance of man, and he strengthened me." Now, I'm just going to say something here, but not going to spend a lot of time on it. We understand that from 9/11 to midnight, there are 3 steps, okay? And these 3 steps are repeatedly illustrated in the scriptures. This is the courtyard, the holy place, the most holy place. The Holy Spirit in John 16:8 comes to convict of sin, righteousness, and judgment. Okay? Salvation is illustrated by justification, sanctification, and glorification. So this 3rd step is where you're glorified. This is where you're judged. Okay? But once you're in here, you're going to find another 3 elements. This is Daniel being touched 3 times. Okay? I'm not going to go into that, but I want to tell you that we're at the point in this movement now where there's a counterfeit that's trying to undermine this message. Okay? And one of the places where there is a controversy is right in here, because there's people that have been involved with this message for some time that are now, among other things, this is just one thing, saying that what's going on here with Daniel when he's being touched 3 times is he has some kind of sin that's being removed from him. Okay, but we've always taught and understood that when you get to this 3rd place where the door closes, your sin has to be put away before then. Okay, so that's what I was saying about the Mare and the Hazon vision. Okay, Daniel already has a complete understanding of both before he gets here. And that's symbolic. The Mare is the first message. The Hazon is the second. You have to have them both to participate in the 3rd. And if you wait to the 3rd to understand the Mare and Hazon, it means because the Mare is justification and the Hazon is sanctification. If you wait until the door closes to try to obtain justification and sanctification, you've got big problems on your hand. We're not going to go into that, but I had to put that in the mix because when we get to Penium is the anchor for this whole presentation. When we get to Penium, you'll see that it identifies the Omega apostasy. All right? So you don't even know what Penium is yet, probably, so that's all right. I'm putting it in place. So what I want you to see here is that Daniel was touched 3 times. And if you're not familiar with this message, then you probably aren't familiar that when you see a doubling of words or expressions, that it's marking the midnight cry. Okay, so here Daniel has been touched the 3rd time in verse 18. It says, "Then there came again and touched me one like the appearance of a man, and he strengthened me. And he said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be unto thee. Be strong, yea, be strong. And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and said, Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me." Now, if you get into the Hebrew in this verse, in these 2 verses, in verse 18 where it says strengthened me, that word strengthened is the same word that you see twice in verse 19. Okay, you see, I was strengthened, thou hast strengthened me. But it's also the same Hebrew word that is translated as strong. Be strong, be strong. So what I want you to see is in these 2 verses, the wise priests are being bound off. Okay? The fact that this Hebrew word is found 5 times in these 2 verses, but twice it's translated as strong, and 3 times it's translated as strengthened. The doubling of the strong is letting you place this at the midnight cry, which you want to do, and you'll see why you want to do that in a moment. But the Hebrew word that is translated as strengthened in these 2 verses 3 times, which is the same Hebrew word that is translated as strong, 5 in prophecy, is either the wise virgins or the foolish virgins. This is obviously the wise virgins by context because it's Daniel who would be a wise virgin and because they're being empowered. But this Hebrew word, what it means is to bind. Okay, this is the binding off of the wise virgins in this history. They're being bound. They're being sealed. Okay, but they're at the midnight cry. If they're being strong, be strong. Okay, the doubling. Now, when you say the doublings at the midnight cry, it usually means that it's midnight to the midnight cry because that's when the midnight cry takes place, right? Is at midnight. So the doubling is usually talking about these two waymarks, midnight cry. But we know that Daniel's here. He's just been made strong. And here's what I want you to see. The next verse says, "Then said he," verse 20, "Knowest thou wherefore I'm come unto thee?" This is Gabriel asking Daniel a question. Now, we have found repeatedly that when you get to the midnight cry, you will see a question asked. All right. So there's your question marking the midnight cry to give you a second internal witness that this is the midnight cry. Because the midnight cry, it's about the parable of the 10 virgins. And at midnight, all the virgins awake. And there's a question that's asked by the foolish virgins to the wise virgins. Give us of your oil. Okay, so there's a question marked here to nail it down prophetically. Verse 20 again, "Then said he, Knowest thou wherefore I'm come unto thee?" Now this is Gabriel talking. "And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia." If you're new to this message, you may not understand that in biblical history there are powers that are two-horned powers. Okay? The United States is a two-horned power. The United States was typified by France, which is a two-horned power. Revelation 11:8 says France is Sodom and Egypt, two horns. Another two-horned power in the scriptures is this power right here. Okay? The Medes and the Persians. Right here, Gabriel said, I'm going to go fight with the Persians. He's going to go fight with the United States because it's the two-horned power. And the United States, in Revelation 17, is the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy. Okay? And the United Nations is the seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy. Okay, so when Gabriel says, "And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia," the word prince in Daniel's last vision, which is chapters 10, 11, and 12, is the Hebrew word sar, S-A-R, and it means a military commander. Okay, he's going to go struggle with the leadership of the United States in a military type context. "And when I'm gone forth, lo, the prince of Greece shall come." Greece is the United Nations. It's the kingdom that follows the Medes and the Persians, but in the Desire of Ages, where the title is called In the Outer Court, if you read carefully, there were Greeks that came to wanted to come and see Jesus, and Sister White's commentary on that was that they represented the Gentiles that would come in after AD 34, the Gentiles being the world. Greece is the world. Greece is the seventh kingdom. It is the United Nations. Why is that significant? Because what it's saying is that at the midnight cry, you have both the sixth and the seventh kingdom. This is where the United Nations, at the midnight cry, which is before the Sunday law in the United States, in this history here, this is where the United States is going down and the United Nations is going up. Because when you get to the Sunday law, the United States is no more. And now it's the 10 kings of Revelation 17. Okay? Everyone know that much of it?
So,
Okay.
I'm sorry, the question mark is representative of what now?
The question is representative of what? Do you understand that in Revelation 17 that the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy is the USA, the seventh is the United Nations, and the eighth is the threefold union of the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet? If you understand that, say amen.
Amen.
Okay. because this is very significant. These kingdoms, the 6th, 7th, and 8th, you have to have a familiarity with them to follow the logic we're going to do here this weekend. It becomes, even for you that were here in Alabama last weekend, there's stuff about this that was not shared in Alabama that is recent, that you have to know the distinction between the 6th, 7th, and 8th kingdom for this to click for you, okay? So, in verse 21, it says, "But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael your prince. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him." And what I want you to see here, if you're not familiar with it, this is absolutely true, and you need to settle into this. Daniel's last vision is chapters 10, 11, and 12. It's one vision, okay? And there's a rule of first mention that God uses throughout the scriptures, okay? The first thing he mentioned is always of supreme importance, and the first thing that's mentioned in Daniel's last vision is Daniel 10:1. Okay, if you go back to Daniel 10:1, which we've already read, it says, "In the 3rd year Cyrus, king of Persia," okay? You can show that 3rd year of Cyrus was at the end of 70 years. Okay, but if you go to the first verse of Daniel 11, it says, "Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him." You can also show that the first year of Darius was the end of another 70-year period. And in Prophets and Kings, Sister White tells us that the 70 years of captivity typify the 1260 years of captivity. Okay? The 70 years of literal Israel and literal Babylon typify the 1260 years of spiritual Israel in spiritual Babylon. And Sister White says so in Prophets and Kings, and I don't remember the page number right now, but that's a standard understanding in this message. But the point is this. When you get to the end of the 1260, you're at 1798, which is the time of the end. Okay? Therefore, when you get to the end of 70 years, you're also at the time of the end. Therefore, what you have to see here is that the very first verse of Daniel's last vision is marking the time of the end, the 3rd year of Cyrus. And now that Gabriel's getting ready to tell Daniel what shall befall his people in the latter days, he goes to Darius's first year to give a second witness that you have to place yourself at the time of the end to correctly understand the information that's about to follow. And every time of the end in history is pointing to this time of the end, 1989, because this is the reform movement of the 144,000. Therefore, when you get to Daniel 11:1, you're in 1989. Okay, the time of the end. And you got to know that. Why do you have to know that? The next 2 verses says. I'm in verse 2 of Daniel 11. "And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Gracia." In 1989, it says, "There shall yet stand up 3 kings in Persia. 1, 2, 3. But the 4th, he's going to be far richer than they all are." Okay? In 1989, you have 2 presidents of the United States, just like you had 2 presidents in 2017. You had Obama up until the 19th of January, and now you have Trump from the 20th onward. What you had here was Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. I'm going to put the first. And what the verse says, it's placed you in 1989. Okay? And the key word there is it says yet. There shall yet 3 more stand up. So it's not talking about George Bush the first. It's talking about the ones that stand up afterwards. Okay, and that would be Bill Clinton, George Bush the Lesser, Obama, and Trump. Okay, so this history is the history of a Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. The prophetic history that has taken place so far in this history, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, it's when a Republican's in office. 9/11 is when a Republican's in office. And all the history that's left is going to be when a Republican's in office. Okay, this isn't making any statement about who's better or who's worse. It's just a fact. When you got a Republican there, that's when your prophetic waymarks, your prophetic stuff is going to happen. Okay, so I know in this class, this group of people, some will know this answer and they might give it away too fast, but I want the newbies to think about it. So even though some of you know it, don't answer right away. All right? Who was the first president of the United States?
Not Washington.
What'd you say?
She said not Washington.
Not Washington.
So I just studied, that's why I
Okay, you
know.
saw it. All right. What president was George Washington? He was the 17th president.
So who was the first?
Okay, that's a good question. All right. I do not have those names down pat, but there came a point in American history, and brothers and sisters, what we're going to put on the board here, this, and you guys didn't see it in Alabama. This is scary stuff. Okay, really scary stuff. You have a time period in American history where they're coming together to write a constitution. They do not have a constitution, okay? And as Seventh-day Adventists, you should all know that the characteristic of the United States is the speaking. In Revelation 13:11, the United States is going to speak as a dragon, and in Great Controversy, Sister White says the speaking of a nation is an action of its legislative and judicial authorities. So here in this history, they call a constitutional convention. Let's have a committee meeting where we can write a constitution. And they select a committee chairman, only they call it a president. And there are 7 of them. Now, the thing about it is, when you get to the 7th president, and his name is Huntington. Okay, I do know his name, but I don't know all these other presidents. Samuel Huntington. He's the leading out in this committee process during a time where they haven't written a constitution yet, but while he's president, they do. Okay, so he's both he's a president. He existed as a president during a time when there was not a constitution yet written, but he also is the first president to have a constitution written. And the first constitution that is written is called the Articles of Confederation. And this, in the past 24 hours, the lights have come on this amazingly. The Articles of Confederation are almost the same, according to the historians, as the Constitution, but it has some minor changes. Okay, but the United States spoke right here. But what I want you to see is that this President Huntington, he was a president that was leading out when there was no Constitution, but during his term, they do pass the Articles of Confederation. So he's also the first. He's both the 7th of no Constitution and the first of 10 more, of a total of 10 presidents that are going to lead to the Constitution right here in 1789. This is the Constitution. All right, and now you have your first president. Who was the richest president of all time? George Washington. George Washington. Why was George Washington rich? Real estate. Why is Trump rich? Real estate, okay? And in Daniel 11, in verses 2 and 3, when it's talking, yet 3 kings shall stand up, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all are. Of all the kings in the Bible, who is the richest king by far?
So,
Okay, I take that back. I'm talking about these wicked kings, okay? Xerxes, this 4th king, okay? You've heard of Alexander the Great, right? Go in your notes so you can get my point to, and it might just take me a second, it's back to, I'm thinking page 18, but no, it's not 18. I'm going to find it for you, though, because you have to see this. There's a passage in here by A.T. Jones. I think it's by A.T. Jones. Just give me a second, please. I want to make sure you see this while we're talking about. All right. Page 14. Good for you. Maybe. You've seen A.T. Jones, right?
that's about actually.
I should have marked it. I read it to Kathy earlier to make the point with her on the airplane. What I'm looking for, and I'll give up on looking for it in just a moment, but it will come, we'll find it here. Oh, it's on the top of page 5. You know Alexander the Great, right? Okay, famous guy. He's the guy that puts together the world that we're going to use to see the king of the north and the king of the south. It's his kingdom. So this is, I don't know, I thought this was A.T. Jones, but it's from Envies of the Gods by John Previs. He was known as Xerxes the Great. This is the one that in chapter 11 is far richer than they all are. This is Esther's husband, okay? He was known as Xerxes the Great, but he took the official title Shah, which means King of Kings, which is one, by the way, definition of Donald. Okay, Donald means ruler of the world, but it can also be understood to be King of Kings. Okay, so, which means King of Kings, usually translated emperor. When Alexander was shown the king's treasury, when Alexander conquers Xerxes and sees his treasury, there were 120,000 talents of gold and silver bullion. For contrast, Alexander began his invasion of Persia with 70 talents of gold. Alexander has 70 talents of gold. That's his financial backing to take over the world. But Xerxes had 120,000 talents of gold. Okay, so when we're talking about wealth, it is a characteristic of Xerxes, and Xerxes is this 4th president here that is the richest, but Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning, and the other richest president is George Washington, and they're both rich because of real estate. Okay, and George means tiller of the ground, and you can find in the book of Genesis the expression tiller of the ground, and you can find in the book of Revelation the expression King of Kings, which Donald means. So you have George being the beginning and Donald being the end in terms of Genesis to Revelation, beginning and end. All right, so there's all kinds of little details that aren't really what I'm trying to get at here. What I'm trying to get at here is go to, this is just, I'm going to give you something just theoretic so you can see it. There is a rule in the scriptures that Rome always comes up 8th and is of the 7. Okay, how many know that rule? Okay, not everyone. So it works like this. I can just talk you through it if you're willing to just follow along. This is the kingdom of Rome in Daniel 7, right? And it disintegrates into 10 horns, does it not? Okay, so there's 10 horns, but you know the story in Daniel 7 is that the little horn is going to have to remove the Hiruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. Okay? And when he removes those 3 horns, then he's going to come up as the stout little horn. Okay, so you have 10 there. So 3 of them have to be removed. So how many you have? 7. And then the papacy comes up 8th. But he's of the 7. What I mean by he's of the 7, if you look over here, the division of Rome into 10 parts is 10 nations, is it not? Yes. So of those 7 nations, after you take the Hiruli, the Ostrogoths, and Vandals out of those 10 nations, of those 7 remaining nations, one of them is Italy. Okay, so when this stout little horn comes up, the papacy, he's of the 7. He's from Italy. Okay, so if that only occurred one time, okay, then it wouldn't mean anything. But Rome always comes up 8th, and it's of the 7. Okay, in Daniel chapter 8, in this history, you got the Medes and the Persians, and how many horns do you have? You have 2 horns. Then you have Alexander the Great. This is showing Alexander the Great after his kingdom's broken. But how many horns does Alexander the Great, the goat, have? 1. Just 1. Okay. But that horn's going to be broken, and then 4 are going to come up in its place. So if you got 2 for Medes and Persia, 1 for Alexander, and now you're going to add 4, how many horns do you have? You have 7. And then what does verse 9 say of Daniel 8? There came forth a little horn. And that little horn is both pagan and papal Rome. Pioneer understanding, it represents both pagan and papal Rome. Rome comes up 8th, and it's of the 7. If you go to the kingdoms of history, okay, the kingdoms of history are Assyria, Egypt, Israel, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, and papal Rome comes up 8th, and it came out of pagan Rome. It's of the 7. Okay, so that's 3 witnesses. That's 3 witnesses. And then go to Revelation 17. All you need is 2 or 3 witnesses to establish something. Now, when the understanding that we have on Revelation 17 is not the standard understanding that you will find in Adventism, but it's airtight. It's been in the public record for 15 years, and it's airtight. So if you go to Revelation 17, whether you've had time to study this out or not, I'm going to tell you how we understand it and make a point. If you go to verse 10, it says, "And there are 7 kings," and a king in Bible prophecy is a kingdom. "And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen." Okay? In order to solve this riddle, you have to have a starting point. I should have told you that first. Go to verse 3. Verse 3 says, John's going to receive this vision, and in verse 3 it says, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast." Okay, so when John's about ready to receive the vision of Revelation 17, one of the first things we're told is that he's carried to the wilderness. So you got to know where the wilderness is. And you go to Revelation 12, verse 6 and verse 14, and it tells us the wilderness is the 1260 years of papal rule. So you know that Sister White was carried forward into history. She was carried to the earth made new and seen Brother Stockman and Fitch there in the earth made new. So prophets can get carried into the future, and that's what's happening here with John in verse 3. He's carried into the wilderness. The 1260 years of papal rule is 400 years beyond the year 100 when he's at the Isle of Patmos. He's carried into the future, specifically into the wilderness, but then in the following verses in Revelation 17, he sees this woman set upon a scarlet-colored beast, and she's drunk with the blood of the martyrs, and she's called the mother of harlots. So he's taken to the very end of the 1260 years, because she's already drunk. You get drunk after you drink. The blood has already been spilled, And she's already called the mother of harlots. Some of the Protestant churches have already returned to her. Okay, they've protested Rome and they're already coming back. So he's taken right down to the end of 1798, and then in verse 10 it says, and there are 7 kings. He's standing in 1798. 5 are fallen. The 5 kings that have fallen in 1798 are Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, papal Rome. Papal Rome falls in 1798. One is the power that is in 1798 is the United States. This is the beginning of the time period of the United States. And one is yet to come. That's the United Nations. And when he comes, he must continue a short space. Okay, so let's read through verse 10. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and one is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7. Who's the beast? It's got to be Rome. Okay, this is modern Rome. Modern Rome in this chapter is talking about the threefold union. The 6th kingdom is the United States. It's the false prophet. The 7th kingdom is the United Nations. It's the dragon. And the 8th kingdom, who is of the 7, is the papacy, the beast. Revelation 17 is telling us how the threefold union of the false prophet, the dragon, and the beast comes together at the end of the world. But each of those kingdoms have a number, 6, 7, 8. Okay? Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. And when you see this riddle, if that's what it is, or this whatever it is, that Rome always comes up 8 and is of the 7, you have enough witnesses to apply it and know that it's identifying Rome. Okay? This is the beginning of the United States here. I'm going to make a point and then we'll move away from this. This is the beginning of the United States. This guy here, this president here, he's both a president when there is no constitution and he's a president when there is a constitution. So he's the 7th, but he's also the first of these 10. You follow the logic? So when he's the first, he's the 8th. But he's of the 7.
Yes, wow.
Okay, so here's this riddle right here. Right here. Now, that's interesting. That's interesting. You can see what the riddle I just showed you. You can see it here if you're willing to see it. This number 1 here is Huntington in a different position. Now he's operating with a constitution, but sequentially he would be 8th. And he'd be of this group too. Now what that means is this. This is the beginning of the United States. At the end of the United States, we're going to have our 45th president that's been typified by our first president, George Washington. Okay? And he's going to be the last president of the United States. And it's going to transition into the 10 kings of Revelation 17. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And right here, the threefold union is going to come into existence. And when you take 3 out of these 10, you have 7. 7. And you have the threefold union right here of the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet, which takes place at the Sunday law, according to Sister White, on more than one witness. Okay, now, I'm not dealing with everything here, but what we've showed you already, if you can follow, is that Gabriel says to Daniel, be strong, you're at the midnight cry, and I'm going to go struggle now with the United States at the midnight cry, and when I'm gone forth, the United Nations is going to come. Okay? So, right in here, this is the midnight cry. And right here you're seeing a transition from the USA to the United Nations, to the 10 kings. And do you know that God selects what he wants to select because he's God? So if you go into Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith, he will tell you that the verse that we just read, in the last verse the verse that we read in Daniel 11. Go back to Daniel 11 now, if you will. In Daniel 11, verse 2, it says, "And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia." That's these 3 kings. All right. "And the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up." And that word stir up can be translated as wake up. Okay, and when you relate to it as wake up, and you go into Joel chapter 3, you find that at the valley of Jehoshaphat, the heathen are going to be awakened for war. Okay, you just go into Joel chapter 3 and see what waking up the heathen is all about, and remember that the heathen is the world. Okay, but that's not my point. My point is that God chooses who he wants to choose, and if you read Uriah Smith, this 4th king that's far richer than they all are is Xerxes the Great, Esther's husband. But from that point in time, the actual point in time when Daniel is marking this, there was actually a total of 10 Persian kings. Did you know that? There's only 3 of them that are noted, and the 4th is far richer than they all are. But there was actually 10 kings, and Xerxes was the 10th. And what he had to do is overcome them all. And when he overcomes this 9th, then he becomes the premier king of all 10 of them. And that's the transition from the United States into the United Nations, because the United States is going to be the premier king, and that's been typified by the work of Xerxes in overcoming those 9 other Medo-Persian kings prophetically. Okay, so this is really profound stuff when you start getting to it. This here, the Midnight Cry, is marking the conclusion of the United States. It's going down. When it gets to the Sunday law, it's finished. But right here, the 7th kingdom, the United Nations, arrives. Okay, you got 2 parallel kingdoms going on here. The 7th kingdom is going to take hold right here, and in Revelation 17, it says those 10 kings are going to agree to give their kingdom unto the beast for 1 hour. So right here, you have the 8th kingdom as well. And what I want you to see is right here at this way mark, that right back here, you've already got the formula, that the 8th is of the 7. And this is marking Revelation 17, where it's saying that the 8th is of the 7. If you can get what I'm saying, this history of these presidents is confirming what we've been teaching about Revelation 17 for almost 20 years. Okay, because this history here, it's just really profound. So this is the end of the United States. This is the beginning of the United States. And what do you do with beginnings and ends?
They'll start the beginning.
No guess. There was a guess, but that's not the guess I'm looking for. You put them together line upon line. Don't you? Okay, so what you would do is you would take this history here, the end, and where would you put it? Where would you put it? You got to take these 10 here, and you got to put them right here. Why? Because there's always a doubling at Midnight Cry. And this is the Midnight Cry. You got double 10s here. Okay, you got double 10s here, which leaves you 7 here. I want to get to this weekend, what this does. I'm just pointing you to some things now to stimulate your sanctified curiosity. All right? But, brothers and sisters, this history here, just from these 2 lines, this history here, it's saying that right here, that this is the beginning of what the Bible calls the evil confederacy. Okay, in Isaiah 8, there's an evil confederacy that Sister White speaks about, and she talks about it being the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. That's why this is called the Articles of Confederation, because the evil confederacy begins right here. All right? And this here, the Constitution, this is the Sunday law. Okay, this is the Sunday law. And this history here, it's marked by 7. Because it's the Sabbath test. Okay, this is what's happening now, is everything that we have studying in this message is getting pulled together. And what it's telling us is the part that the Lord held his hand over was that we thought the Soviet Union was the king of the South, and it was swept away in 1989. But the king of the South was Russia, and it didn't get swept away. And it still has a role to play here at the end of the world. And the role it has to play is it's going to have a struggle to take control of the world. How do you know that? A simple way to know it without any Bible is Vladimir Putin. Okay, the first leader of Russia was Vladimir Lenin. Okay, Vladimir means ruler of the world. Okay, Vladimir Putin means ruler of the world, and Donald means ruler of the world. You have the king of the South and the king of the North that right now are getting ready to battle over the rulership of the world, and even their names are saying it. Okay, not just the scriptures. Okay, scary stuff. So go to Daniel 11 again. I want to show you the premise of this study. And it's this. And this is unfortunate if you do not understand the last 6 verses of Daniel 11, because this will be harder for you to follow. If you don't mind, I hope this is strong enough, but I'm going to just set this up here.
There's another use, so you want to.
Nah, this is fine. No, I think it's okay. All right. So I'm not going to deal much with the you want to use it, all right.
We can maybe move it so it's on camera.
Oh, the camera.
Well, the camera guy is just going to get a workout, it's all right. Okay, I'm not even writing there yet. So in verse 3, it says, "A mighty king shall stand up," and we know that was Alexander the Great. And what we're understanding is that even though the United States is the 6th kingdom, the United States has been typified by France, and France was the firstborn of the Catholic Church. She was the eldest daughter of the Catholic Church, and it's typifying the same thing about the United States. The United States is Ahab. The Bible says all the kings of the earth are going to commit fornication with the papacy, but the first king to do it is the United States. And it did it back in the time period of Ronald Reagan, when they formed a secret alliance. So the first king of the earth that commits fornication with the papacy is the United States. Therefore, it's the preeminent king. So even though the United States is going to end as the 6th kingdom of Bible prophecy, it's going to transcend into the leadership of the United Nations. It's going to be Ahab, the king of the 10 kings. Donald Trump is heading that direction. Okay? So in verse 3, it says, "A mighty king shall stand up." That was Alexander the Great, pioneer understanding. We're saying that this is the arrival of the 7th kingdom of Bible prophecy, the United Nations, "that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven." This can either be identifying a fourfold judgment that you can show from the scriptures, or you can just be relating to this, that it's saying that his kingdom is a world kingdom, because the world kingdom is divided to the 4 winds. It can go either way. "And not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion." And that word dominion there that I just read, according to his dominion, it's a different Hebrew word than verse 5. In verse 5, you see dominion 3 times. The end of verse 5, it says, "Have dominion, his dominion shall be a great dominion." That means dominion, those 3. But in verse 4, it means parallel kingdom. Because from where was I showing it? From here to here, you have 2 kingdoms going. You have the 6th kingdom going down and the 7th kingdom going up. This is the time of the parallel kingdoms. And you have lots of witnesses to that, because internally you have the 2 sticks joining right here in this history. Okay, if you know what the 2 sticks are. So this is a history that is about parallel kingdoms. It's parallel kingdoms on the internal, when the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are coming together, but it's on the external. It's where the United States is going down and the United Nations is rising up. Okay, so that word dominion lets you see that in verse 4. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others besides those. Now, we're going to switch back now to the typical pioneer application. In verse 5 it says, and the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, he shall be strong above him, and shall have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. The way the pioneers correctly understood this is Alexander the Great's kingdom gets divided to the four winds of heaven. East, west, north, south. And the king of the south is Ptolemy. And he has a general, a very good general named Antiochus Seleucus, all right, was originally one of his generals. And notice verse 5. It says, and the king of the south, that's Ptolemy, that's Egypt. The king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes. What's the Hebrew word prince? Sar, it means a military leader. One of his generals, this is one of his generals in history, Seleucus, shall be strong above him and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. And what Seleucus does, he breaks away from Ptolemy, and he conquers the east. Then he goes and he conquers the west. And then he goes and he conquers the north. And from that point on, and this is the year 301, I think, and I have to check my dates. From this point on, you're not going to hear about the east and the west. It's just from now on, it's a struggle between north and south. 281. You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. 281. Now, what I'm going to say, what we're going to claim here is what's being illustrated here is a threefold conquering: east, west, and north. And when the third obstacle is conquered, he becomes the king of the north. Okay, so I'm going to say on this timeline that in 281 BC, these are all BC, you have verse 5, and it's typified in 538. Because in 538, you have the third conquering for the papacy. What three things did the papacy have to conquer? The three horns. The Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. And when were the Goths driven out of the city of Rome? 538. Okay. Now the papacy setting is the king of the north. What I'm saying is, verse 5 is typifying 538. And when the pioneers go in and talk about the history of the three horns being plucked up in Daniel 7, and they talk about the Heruli being removed, and then the Vandals being removed, and then the Goths being removed, how many years did it take to remove those three horns? 45. But that's a different story. It took 45 years, all right. Okay, so what I'm saying is verse 5, we're going line upon line here, brothers and sisters. Verse 5 is typifying 538. Okay, what's going to happen after 538? Papacy's going to rule for 1,260 years, right? Down here till 1798. You already know that part. Yes? Okay, so let's read verse 6. And in the end of the years, that expression, every fact has its bearing. It's talking about this history up here, BC 281. Seleucus has just become the king of the north in 281, and the very next verse says at the end of the years. It's telling you that there's some element of time. You guys, as a student of prophecy, you may not know what the time is, but it's just put into the mix that there is a certain amount of years now that are going to be discussed. And what I'm saying is from here to here, there is a certain amount of years that we know about. It's called 1260. Okay? And I'm saying that this history at the beginning of Daniel 11 is going to perfectly illustrate this history here. Okay? And now, before we get back to that, let me show you something about this history here. Daniel 11, verse 40 says, and at the time of the end. That's the first words. You have it in your notes from Great Controversy 356. When is the time of the end?
1798.
So, verse 40 begins in 1798. This is verse 40. This is the history of verse 40. And where does that history end? 1989. He's wrong. Okay. What's the next verse? It's verse 41. And what's verse 41? It's the Sunday law in the United States. Over here is the Sunday law in the United States. That's verse 41. The history of verse 40 goes from 1798 all the way to the Sunday law. Okay, yes? Everyone understand that? You need to understand that. You know why this is significant? We won't get into this, but it is significant. These verses go all the way to Daniel 12:1. Okay, but I'm just going to put verse 45 here. Daniel 12:1 says, and at that time. That's how it's Michael stands up, human probation closes. But the first phrase of verse 1 of Daniel 12 says, and at that time, saying somewhere back in these verses. Okay? So these verses here, from 1798 to the Sunday law, this is the history of verse 40. And from the Sunday law until the close of human probation, this is the history of verses 41 through 45. Everyone understand that? Okay, now the reason this is significant, and we won't spend a lot of time here, but you got to see it. You have to see this. Is that right here, there is an absolute essential change. You know what it is? This is the history of the church militant, and this is the history of the church triumphant. Okay? Lot of light connected with that. Okay? And I'm not talking about fractals. I understand what I'm saying about fractals and midnight cry and so on and so forth. But at the basic level, verse 40 is the history of the church militant. And my brother here went out on a limb, and I sawed it off on him. I said, how far does verse 40 go to? And he said 1989. Okay, 1989 was the collapse of the Soviet Union that was brought about through an alliance between the United States and the Vatican. That's what this magazine deals with. Okay? But what I'm going to tell you here is as we go through these line upon lines in the beginning of Daniel 11, they're going to uphold everything that we teach about Daniel 11, verse 40. But they're going to do something that's really profound, really scary. Is that they're going to identify all this history, but they're going to identify two waymarks in verse 40 that have never been recognized before until now. Right here and right here. One of them's called the Battle of Raphia, and one of them's called the Battle of Panium. And when you look at them, you're going to find that these waymarks represent the midnight cry and midnight before the Sunday law. And that's what makes this study so serious and so profound. Because it's going to show you that at midnight, the United States is going to be defeated by Russia. And that the United States is going to retaliate at the midnight cry and take Russia out for good. But the histories that typify these battles is the history of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Do you remember how the whole world was different after the collapse of the Soviet Union? Another history that typifies these battles is the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped upon Japan at the end of World War II. You remember how, I wasn't there, but you understand how that changed the course of history? So these battles here are going to change history in a way that it's almost impossible to understand. And you can turn on the news and see it happening before your very eyes. And the only people that are seeing in advance what's going on are the people that have been following this message. It's quite a responsibility. Okay, so let me try to make my point. Yes?
I'm just saying, is that, you said all along that we predict something's gonna happen.
that wakes, yeah,
We're already predicting it.
okay, so is that?
We're not going out and say, this is a prediction. We're teaching this.
Right.
This is airtight. Rushes about on several witnesses, rushes about to strike. Okay, now it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a hot war. Okay? You understand what would happen if they had the ability to collapse the internet in the United States? Okay. Do you understand what would happen? Do you understand that I'll tell you a little story.
Yeah.
No, I won't tell you that little story. Well, I'll tell you a little story. It makes sense to me. Where we became Seventh-day Adventists was in California, next to the most sophisticated naval weapons center in the world. There's no place in the world that makes more sophisticated weaponry than Channel Lake Naval Weapons Center out in the desert, the high desert in California. There's none like it. It was there that they developed the atomic bombs that they dropped on Japan. They practiced them over in New Mexico, but they were invented and actually assembled at China Lake Naval Weapons Center. So they've been doing these sophisticated weapons for many, many moons now, okay? And when they first came out with PCs, personal computers, we were homeschooling my son, and he was about 10 years old or so. I don't know. But I decided, okay, we have a secular business. We're going to buy a PC, and we're going to put our accounting system on a PC, and we're going to let my son do it so he can start learning computers. And we were studying on a regular basis with some of these engineers from China Lake Naval Weapons Center that were already dealing with computer languages, COBOL and all these various languages that you use. So my son gets connected with these engineers out on the base when he's getting into computers. And now he's a world-class computer guy because right from his very young age, he was handling these sophisticated languages. But what he reminded Kathy and I of, my son just recently, we had forgotten. Before 1989, he was working with this one engineer on the base, and he and this engineer developed a search program for Ellen White's writings. And this engineer and myself were the first people on planet Earth that were doing computer searches on the Spirit of Prophecy well before 1989. It's kind of weird that you would be one of the first people doing that, and now everyone has the Ellen White CD-ROM. My point is this. Some people have special gifts for certain times. I think the Lord gave that little gift to my son to get us a head start in studying these things. But who is it that designed the what do you call it? The computer language that controls the CIA and the FBI and the NSA and all of the secret entities in the United States? Who invented that program? Guy named Snowden. And he's just not a computer tech, brothers and sisters. He's the one that designed that program. Where is he now? He's in Russia. Okay? So I'm not saying it's a nuclear bomb. It could be some other thing. But brothers and sisters, if you know about 1449 to 1453 and the bomb maker that was hired, anyway, getting off track. I'm going to take a little bit more time and put this in place, okay? And I don't want to put so much time in putting this in place like I did in Alabama because we never get through it. I want to get to some punchlines here. So let's move forward real quick. When are you going to shut me down here tonight?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock. Okay. Are you leaving?
I'm so tired, I can't say boo-hoo.
Okay.
Sorry.
See you tomorrow, Lord
I'll see you
willing.
in the morning.
It's getting recorded.
Be careful.
So back to verse 6, and at the end of the years, there's some kind of years mentioned in here. They shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. Okay, there is a peace treaty. Brothers and sisters, there's a peace treaty in here. This is pioneer understanding. This is the year 252 BC. Okay, I'm gonna back up for you. Alexander the Great's kingdom is divided into four. The king of the south, Ptolemy, has a general that's going to make a march. He's going to conquer the east, the west, and the north. By 281, the third horn has been removed. He's typifying 538 when the papacy takes control of the world. Verse 6 begins with an expression that lets you know there's some kind of element of time in here. But history and pioneers will tell you that what we just read here is that the king of the south, he wants to make a peace treaty with the king of the north because the king of the north is strong now. Okay, so he sends his sister Berenice, okay, to marry the king of the north. And in order for the king of the north to marry Bernice, he has to put away his wife, Laodice, where Laodice is credited with the one, she took the money and she built the city that's known as Laodicea. Okay, so in any case, Laodice is not going to appreciate this, and she's going to retaliate against Bernice and all the people that came with her and kill them. So the king of the south there's going to be a retaliation that takes place by the king of the south, and this retaliation takes place in 246. Are you watching the dates? I think it's 246.
It's 246.
Okay. So just for one point I want to put in here. This equates to 35 years. In 35 years, if you take a point right there and make it 3.5 years, 3.5 years is 1,260 years.
Yes.
Okay? So when you get into the characteristics of this retaliation, you will find that the characteristics of this retaliation in 246 BC is identical to the characteristics of the retaliation by Napoleon Bonaparte in 1798. And you will also find that there was a peace treaty that Napoleon put in place in 1797. The reason Napoleon was putting in peace treaties is he used it after the fact. As he conquered a nation, he first went into a peace treaty. Then when he conquered the nation, he used that treaty to justify stealing their art and their art treasures and taking them back to the Louvre in Paris. Okay? That was standard operating procedure for Napoleon. And Napoleon entered into a peace treaty with Italy in 1797. And between 1797 and 1798, one of the diplomats from France was in Vatican City, and he was trying to bring about a communist celebration, and one of the Vatican guards shot the guy, killed him. That was the excuse that Napoleon had to do a retaliation against the papacy. Now, in your notes, 'cause I don't want to spend a whole lot of time in here, I just want to put it in place. In your notes, I will read to you the characteristics of when Ptolemy's son retaliates for Bernice. Okay, Bernice is given to the king of the north as a peace treaty, and she's going to get killed by the wife that gets set aside. And then I'm on page 3, on verse 8 and 9. It says in the middle of page 3, it says verse 8 and 9. When he comes into the king of the north's castle, he's going to carry him back to Egypt. He's going to carry him back to Egypt as a captive. It's an attack of retaliation because Bernice and her son and her entourage was killed. So it's an attack of retaliation. He enters the capital totally unmolested. The king of the south, when he comes in there, there's no resistance. He walks right in to the castle and takes the king of the north captive and brings him back to Egypt. It's the first time the king of the south conquers the king of the north. And the king of the north, he's going to be in Egypt and he's going to die. He's going to fall off his horse and die. And they bring back, when Bernice went to the king of the north, she took a bunch of art treasures from the temple of Bacchus in Egypt with her. Okay? And so when he comes and retaliates, he brings all these treasures back and puts them back into the temple of Bacchus in Egypt. And it's such a significant event for the Egyptians that they change his name to the benefactor. He's restored the temple. Okay, so he's restoring the temple in 246, typifying 1798. And in 1798 is where you have the Millerite history when the heavenly temple is about to be restored. But let's run over the history of 1798 and see if it isn't parallel. It's an attack of retaliation. Napoleon is retaliating for this General Dufault being executed by the Vatican Guard. They enter, if you did not know it, when Berthier goes into Vatican City, he walks right into the Vatican Palace without any resistance, walks right up to the Pope and takes him captive without any resistance, just like went on in this history. It's the first time the King of the South, as communism, takes down the King of the North as Catholicism. He takes the King of the North captive, and the King of the North dies in captivity, just like this king died in captivity. And France brings the treasures of the Vatican back to the Louvre Museum, just as Ptolemy did in that history. And the most important quote probably on Daniel 11 is right in between those two references, where it talks about the repetition of the history of Daniel 11. Okay, so now here's what I'm saying. I'm saying the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 are the end of the vision of Daniel 11. Okay, you go into Daniel 12, it's more like an epilogue, all right? The human probation's closed, okay? So here, the end of Daniel 11, Christ in these verses here, which are the beginning of Daniel 11, he's bringing these verses to perfection by opening up the beginning, because he illustrates the end from the beginning, and he's doing it in the very same chapter, okay? So we know that after 1798 in verse 40, there's going to come a point in time where the King of the North is going to retaliate along with an ally, the United States, the chariots, ships, and horsemen. So we should expect to see, if what I'm saying is true, that historical event marked as well. And it is. Okay? Now notice verse, and I'm passing over, I'm passing over some of the details on these verses. And Lord willing, we're going to go back into the details of these verses tomorrow. But I want you to see at least one thing in closing here tonight. Okay? In verse 10 it says, "But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come, and overflow, and pass through. Then shall he return, and be stirred up even to his fortress." This is where the hand of the Lord is removed. Okay, now you're asking, what does he mean? I'm saying now we're dealing with what is typifying 1989. And the history that's being spoken of is the sons of the kings of the north. Okay? And one of them is going to certainly come. And the one that certainly comes is a guy named Antiochus the Great. Okay? He's going to come and he's going to retaliate against the king of the south. But what it says that's very important here is that he shall be, at the last part of verse 10, and be stirred up, and that word even is supplied. So he'll be stirred up to his fortress. Okay? If this is his fortress, he's going to come up to the fortress, but not into the fortress. Follow me on this. This is the thing you got to see. Notice back in verse 7. We just went over verse 7 very quickly. But verse 7 says this, "But out of the branch of her roots," this is Bernice's family. Berenice's family, you with me? Out of the branch of her root shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north. He enters into the fortress. Okay? He enters into it. But here in verse 10, they only come up to the fortress. They don't enter into it. Okay, so in this magazine, we understood something. Go to Daniel 11, verse 40. I'll show you what we understood. It's not really that wrong, but it is illustrating the Lord holding his hand over a piece of information. In Daniel 11, verse 40, it says this. And at the time of the end, 1798, shall the king of the south, the king of communism, France, push, means war against, at him, the papacy. 1798, shall the communist France begin war against the papacy, and every Seventh-day Adventist knows that's true. Deadly wound was delivered in 1798. But there's a colon there that talks about part B of the verse, and it says, and the king of the north, in 1989, shall come against the king of communism, which is now transcended into the Soviet Union. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, and with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. That's the economic and military might of the United States, the ally. And shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Okay, now here's what I want you to see here. In this verse, this last part of the verse, you have a king of the north defeating the king of the south. You see that at the last part? Everyone see that? And the expression there is overflow and pass over. Okay? So go back now to verse 10 of the same chapter. It says, but his son shall be stirred up. His sons are the king of the north. Shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one of his sons, one shall certainly come, Antiochus the Great, and shall overflow and pass through. It's the identical Hebrew words. It's just translated as pass through in verse 10 instead of pass over here in verse 40. It's the identical word, okay? But in this verse, verse 10, it says, he'll be stirred up to his fortress. Just to his fortress. Okay, so here you have the king of the north only coming to the fortress. So when we used to read verse 40 of Daniel 11, we would say that in 1989, the entire Soviet Union was swept away, so the king of the south was gone. And we knew the king of the south was a dragon power, so we watched Gorbachev do his perestroika and then take a job in the United Nations. So we're figuring, okay, the dragon power has moved from the Soviet Union to the United Nations, okay? But we didn't see these play on words. Now we need 2 or 3 witnesses to establish something, right? Go to Isaiah. Go to Isaiah 8. May take just a second to find this. And you remember, you know the story of Isaiah 7, right? That's where the 25:20 begins. You know, within 65 years shall the king of the north be taken into captivity, and at the end of the 65 years, the southern kingdom is taken into captivity. And you got a wicked king of the south in Isaiah 7. Who's the wicked king of the south? Ahaz. And what has Ahaz done? Do you know what Ahaz did in that history? He's the king of Judah. What did Ahaz do in that history that made him so wicked?
Being an ally with the,
He made an ally. He wasn't the ally. It was the northern kingdom that made the alliance with...
pagan kings, Syria.
Okay, it does not, maybe that might qualify too, but that's not what I'm getting at. What he did is he sent the high priest up to the Assyrian kingdom and had him make a blueprint of the Assyrian temple, and he brought him back to Judah, and he closed God's temple, and in the courtyard of the temple, he built this Assyrian pagan temple. So it's about temple desecration, okay? Because you're going to see these kings of the south, they're going to desecrate the temple. So I want to put that in place. He's a wicked king. But the 2520 is introduced in Isaiah 7, and the 2520 is the message of the latter rain. And Ahaz is rejecting the message of the latter rain in Isaiah 7, okay? So there's going to be a pronouncement upon this wicked king Ahaz, who's the king of the south. Okay, so if you go to Isaiah 8, and let's start in verse 5. It says, "The Lord spake also unto me again, saying, For as much as this people refuses the waters of Shiloah that go softly, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son," okay, you can show that they're rejecting the latter rain message. Okay, we're not studying that, but I want you to see the judgment that's pronounced upon Ahaz. It says, "Now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth up on them the waters of the river, strong and many, even the king of Assyria." Who's that? That's the king of the north. Okay, so the king of the north is going to deal with this king of the south. And it's about waters. They've rejected the water of Siloam. Okay, and now they're going to get the waters of the Euphrates. All right? And it says, "And all his glory, and he shall come up over all his channels and go over all his banks, and he shall pass through Judah. He shall overflow and go over." There it is again. It's the identical Hebrew words. Overflow and go over. It's expressed different, but it's the identical words. That's 3 verses that have the same expression, and all 3 verses are talking about a king of the north defeating the king of the south. But in verse 40, it's not real clear whether he goes into the fortress or he doesn't. But in verse 10 of Daniel 11, he only goes up to his fortress. But what does verse 8 say here? "And he shall pass through Judah, he shall overflow and go over, and he shall reach even to the neck. And the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of the land, O Emmanuel." Okay, what does it mean that prophecy said he only stretched to his neck? It's when he wasn't destroyed completely, because when Sennacherib comes into Judah, he conquers all of Judah, and then he comes to Jerusalem. And you know the story, what happened? He's cursing God. And Isaiah is saying, "Speak to us in Babylonian. We understand the Chaldean language. Don't speak in Hebrew." You remember that story? What happened to the Assyrian army that night? An angel destroyed them. My point is this. The coming up to the neck means they got all of Judah, but not Jerusalem. They didn't come into the fortress. Okay, so you have 3 verses that are telling the king of the north defeating the king of the south. They're all using the identical words, overflow and pass over. And 2 of those 3 verses are saying he comes up to the fortress or he comes up to the neck. Verse 40, it's not real clear, but upon the testimony of 2, it's telling you that what the Lord held his hand over here is that we didn't understand that Russia was the king of the south, and it's still a prophetic player. Okay? So, in this history here, when the Lord removed his hand off of 1843, the 7th seal had arrived. The final revelation of light that brought this message to perfection. And brothers and sisters, the Lord is removing the 7th seal in this history. He's bringing this message to perfection. And he's telling you and I as he does it, it means that the door is about to close. Okay? So, back to Daniel 10.
The 7th seal was opened at midnight cry, and we haven't reached the midnight yet, but he's already opening the 7th seal. So is it the process?
Yeah, well, okay. She asked a good question, but a difficult question if you haven't been following this message, okay? Because in order to answer your question fully, then I got to go in and explain fractals, which I'm not worried about at this point. But here's what I want you to understand about Samuel Snow. Is in December, that's 12. 12 of Yeah, 1843, you're right, 1843. Somewhere in that neighborhood, William Miller wrote an article, okay? And Samuel Snow takes that article, and from this point on, he starts working with this article. That's his starting point, is William Miller's article. And he's developing his understanding of the midnight cry all the way through. I'm not saying that we're here, okay? I'm saying we're back over here. The seventh seal is now being developed, okay, for us. I'm not afraid to say it. If I thought we were over here, I'd say it. That isn't what I think. It's being developed right now, okay? We're in advance of the Boston Tabernacle presentation on...
Well, that's what I was going to say.
We're in advance of
Midnight
that.
Cry was going way before midnight.
Yes, okay. Samuel Snow is going to present the Midnight Cry message for the first time publicly on July 21st, 1844 at the Boston Tabernacle. And then 25 days later, he's going to present it again at the Exeter Camp Meeting. That's where it takes hold. What I'm saying is we're over here. We're on this side of midnight because for us, midnight is where the door closes. Okay? All right. Okay, so back to verse 10. Verse 10 is what the Lord is removing his hand from. Russia. The fortress of the king of the south was Russia, and it's still a player. Okay? In verse 11 and 12 says, "And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north, and he shall set forth a multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it." Now, what I want you to see here is, I got to get these dates. This history here of the king of the north retaliating against the king of the south is, back up in my notes, 219. Now, this is verse 10. These are all BC. How many of you know about the Syrian wars? Did you know there was 6 Syrian wars? Okay. The first one's over here somewhere. It's still up in the air about these 6 Syrian wars. But what I want you to see, and I have the 6 Syrian wars in your notes towards the back, so you can check this out. 281, the historians will tell you that's the second Syrian war. Okay? This is the third Syrian war. And over here is the fourth Syrian war, and it's called the Battle of Raphia. And it's followed by the fifth Syrian war, which is called the Battle of Panium. And then there's a sixth Syrian war. My point is, we're not sure yet what the first and the sixth Syrian war typify in this line, but the second is verse 5. Every historian will agree with it. The third is verses 6 through 9. Every historian will agree with it. And the fourth, all the historians will tell you it's the Battle of Raphia, and that's verses 11 and 12. And this is verses 13 through 15. 4 of the 6 Syrian wars, for positive, are mentioned in Daniel 11 in these previous verses. Okay, so you got a line of history going on here that is above and beyond just the basic line that you can confirm in Daniel 11. That's helping tie these things together. So go to verse 11 and 12 now, and it says this. The king of the south, all right, in 1989, in 219, Antiochus the Great, he comes up to the fortress of Egypt, but he thoroughly defeats Egypt. He takes all his territory except for Egypt, and he's typifying what happened to the Soviet Union in 1989, when all the satellite bloc countries are freed up and Russia's left standing there. Okay, that's 1989. So the king of the South in 1989 would have been Russia. And we didn't see that. Who is the king of the North?
Is it Russia as opposed to the Soviet Union, or what do you say?
It's Russia. It's Russia. That's what we understand now. It was Russia all the way through. It moved from France to Russia. Okay, and Russia gathered these satellite countries around them, and the king of the North took them back. Okay, and so Russia's still active here. Who's the king of the North here in 1989? And you can say it's the papacy. But the papacy and the United States, they committed fornication in that history. And we're talking about warfare here. And the army of Rome is the USA. Okay? So what did verses 11 and 12 say? That the king of the south is going to crush the king of the north here. Who's the king of the south? It's Russia. You know, I used to have I should have brought it with me. Back in the old days when all we were dealing with was the collapse of the Soviet Union, I had a book that was written by a famous KGB guy. And I used to use it because he contended, and he had all these famous American diplomats that gave their testimony about what a straight guy this was, a KGB guy. And he argued that all the way through the battle plan of the Soviet Union, the battle plan of the KGB, was to collapse the Soviet Union and allow the Western Guard to go down and then strike. And I still have that book. It's called Old Lies for New. And when it came out in the 1990s, it was a book that was mentioned. Okay, that supposedly was the design of the KGB all the way through. Who's Putin associated with? KGB, okay, if you want to take this serious. So what I'm saying is, if what we're applying here is correct, that this Battle of Raphia, which is a terrible defeat for the king of the north, is identifying that the United States is just going to get somehow, and I'm saying somehow, it could be, you know, internet, what would you call cyber warfare? But then the United States is going to retaliate at Pippenger. And Pippenger is the one that is amazing. Let's show you that one, and then we can close. After the United States gets defeated by Russia at the Battle of Raphia, which is midnight in terms of the waymarks, it says in verse 13, "For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north," this is the United States, "shall come and cast up a mountain, take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand." Russia's going down. "Neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand." So Russia's going down with his chosen people. I don't know who his chosen people are for sure, but let me show you one thing in closing here. 1989. There was actually, not counting the papacy's with the United States, there's actually 3 players here. Because in 1989, you've had a 10-year war, a proxy war. And the war is going on between we'll call it USSR, but it's really Russia, and the USA, and it's going on in Afghanistan. The third player here is Islam. Okay, now this proxy war, these two powers fighting a war in someone else's country, when it's finally over in 1989, the Soviet Union collapses. It had a tremendous impact, even though it's a proxy war. Okay. So today, in 2017, there's a proxy war going on planet Earth, brothers and sisters. And it's in Syria. All of these battles took place in Syria. This is the 6 Syrian wars, brothers and sisters. This is Syria all over again. And the players are in the USA.
And Islam, the third.
And Islam's right there. Islam is here just like it was here. Okay? So many of us know what the expression turning point means, right? You see these secular authors talking about a turning point. What did the secular authors say the turning point of the Syrian war was? It was 2015. That was the turning point, according to the secular authors, because that's when Russia got involved. But in that history of 2015, when was the first time that Russia brought in Iranian foot soldiers? 9/11, 2015. Russia brought in Iranian troops into Syria. So there's a proxy war going on all over again by the same players. Okay, so what I'm saying is 1989 is probably typifying this. Probably could very well be a proxy war. And if that's the case, when Russia gets defeated here, it's saying even his chosen people. Could it be that Islam is the chosen people? Because in the scriptures, in Daniel, the chosen people are many times God's people. Okay? Is Islam part of God's people in terms of being a son of Abraham? Okay, so there's a connection there, and I'm not sure about that, but there's other lines that we'll get to tomorrow that are going to. This isn't the only argument that it's Russia we're talking about, brothers and sisters. This is just setting you up for tomorrow's study, because we can go all the way through verse 36 now, clearly. Okay. So much in so little time. So if you're new to this, and you haven't read this, you should read this. What I'm saying is, these verses that we'll be looking at in more detail tomorrow, from the beginning of Daniel 11, are going to bring this understanding of verses 40 to 45 to perfection. And when they do, it will be paralleling the midnight cry message of Samuel Snow. And it's coming to pass because we now see that we misunderstood that the king of the south was Russia. We thought it was the Soviet Union, but it was Russia, and it's been sleeping until now. It's being opened up. Okay, so this was the Lord. The Lord is removing his hand, just the way he removed it from the chart. So if you're not familiar with this, I've given this out before. When we had meetings and we broke for lunch, and someone that wanted to get caught up, he took this, and during our lunch break, he read it. More than once this has happened. So if you haven't read this, get one from us and try to come up to speed before tomorrow morning, if all possible. Okay, shall we pray?
Yes.
Heavenly Father, we're living in troublous times, and as you've said, the final movements are rapid ones, and we watch what's going on with this last president of the United States, and the movements are rapid, and the activities of the other players on planet Earth are rapid, and what we need to do quickly. We ask that you'd give us a double measure of your presence here on the Sabbath, as you promised you would, that you can awaken our understanding to the seriousness of the times that we're living, and give us the ability to rightly divide these things in a way that would better prepare us to give a clear, concise message to those that we interact with. We ask now as we break that you'd give us traveling mercies wherever we're going, that you'd take us home safely, that you'd give us a good night's sleep and bring us back here tomorrow to the Veterans Hall, that we can continue pursuing these studies. And we thank you for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.